Elijah's voice cracked through the chaos as his chest slammed against the cold, waxy airport floor. The fluorescent lights flickered above him like interrogation lamps, flashing in sync with phones raised high and recording. Gasps echoed off tile and steel, worlds. Someone shouted from behind a Starbucks line. 2 TSA agents pinned Elijah's arms back with mechanical force, kneeling into his shoulder blades. The breath fled his lungs as his briefcase cracked open beside him. Credentials spilled out papers, fanned like feathers his ID, hospital badge, and a laminated card labeled Level 1 Trauma Certification, fluttering underfoot. "Sir." "Stop resisting," barked one officer. "I'm not resisting. I'm on call. Let me go." Elijah's voice fought against panic, but no one listened. He could hear a baby crying, a suitcase rolling away. Muffled laughter, none of it made sense. One bystander zoomed in on his face, whispering, "What did he do?" "I don't know," another replied. And there, on the floor, Elijah's trauma ID slid under a bench, ignored by everyone, just inches from a child's forgotten juice box. In that moment, Elijah Brookser, black trauma, not a healer, not a man, not a human being. Just a headline in the making. Boots crushed the document, stamped in bold, board-certified trauma surgeon. Elijah watched helplessly, cheek pressed to the floor, as his professional life was reduced to scraps beneath security's tread. "I'm a doctor. I have a surgery scheduled in 2 hours," he pleaded, voice raw. No response. One officer muttered, "They all say that." Another checked his walkie, muttering codes like it was routine because, to them, it was. A badge slid across the tile, face down. His name, Dr. Elijah Brooks, MD, briefly under the overhead lights before disappearing beneath a rolling cart. His words were true, his documents real, his urgency life-saving. But the truth didn't carry weight here. To them, Elijah was still just a problem. He gritted his teeth. His pride wasn't just wounded, it was being stomped out in a place built for departure. Everything about him, his dignity, his identity, was being forcibly grounded. It started with a delay. Elijah had calmly approached the gate counter 2 hours earlier, seeking assistance after his flight to New Haven was suddenly rescheduled. "Excuse me," he'd said politely, "is there a way to get rebooked sooner? I'm scheduled for an emergency pediatric procedure tonight." The white airline employee barely looked up. Then she looked down and lingered. Her eyes scanned him top to bottom. Tailored slacks, hoodie, overnight bag. She blinked. "You're acting suspicious." Elijah frowned. "Suspicious? I just asked for an earlier flight." "Sir, please step back from the counter. I'm showing you my ID," he said, laying it down. "And here's my hospital credential. I'm not trying to cause trouble." She stared at his documents and picked up the phone. Security showed up within minutes. Back in the present, Elijah writhed against the cuffs, while the same employee stood behind her desk, arms folded, watching, no alarm, no concern. She didn't need to say anything. She already had. The officer leaned in, eyes narrow. "You match a description. Just cooperate." Elijah twisted, pain flaring in his shoulder. Description of what? A black man with a bag. The officer didn't blink. Nearby, a child stared at Elijah. Their mother gently turned the kid away and whispered something under her breath. Elijah saw it all. The retreat, the fear, the silent assumptions. "I'm not whoever you're looking for." He gritted. Still no acknowledgement, no clarification, just a phrase soaked in centuries of recycled justification. You match the description. Generic enough to mean anything. Dangerous enough to mean everything. He wasn't being mistaken for someone. He was being filtered through. Prejudice flattened into a stereotype, and the badge made that legal. A woman in a denim jacket stood feet away, phone up, recording. Her mouth was tight, her gaze blank. She wasn't filming to help, just to capture. A teenager whispered, "He didn't do anything." His father grabbed his shoulder. "Stay out of it." Elijah's breath heaved. "You're ruining lives with this," he shouted. "Do you even care what happens next?" Still, the officers were stone. He turned his eyes to the crowd, pleading, "Someone tell them. You saw Etai didn't do anything." But no one stepped forward. Justice didn't seem to live here. Only phones, silence, and avoidance in a sea of faces. None were brave enough to see him as a person. The weight of their quiet pressed down harder than the agents pinning him. "I'm not the threat," Elijah choked out. "A child is waiting for me. I'm supposed to be in surgery by 8 p.m. The officers didn't respond. One adjusted his grip. Elijah's voice cracked. "That child might die if I'm not there." From the crowd, a woman's voice broke through. "He's telling the truth." Security waved her off without even looking. Elijah looked up, eyes glistening. Please. His entire career, all the hours, the lives, saved it, all meant nothing. Here, he wasn't being treated like a surgeon. He was being treated like a threat. Unhand him now. The voice was electrocuting through everything. Every head turned. There, standing firm in a tailored trench coat, was Mayor Danielle Harris, her expression pure fury, her unshakable authority. The security officers froze, because for once, someone powerful saw Elijah, and she wasn't staying silent. Elijah Brooks had been a kid on the block where the cracks in the pavement mirrored the ones in his future. Raised in a tough neighborhood, he was no stranger to both the sting of poverty and the constant weight of prejudice. Yet, there was always a flicker in his heart, a burning drive to prove that his worth wasn't defined by his zip code. With every scar his family endured, Elijah grew stronger, more determined. School was his escape, and in the quiet corners of libraries, he found solace, a world away from the chaos of his surroundings. "You'll never get out of here," they'd told him. But that only fueled his ambition by the time he was accepted. Into Harvard Medical School, he had already learned to ignore the doubts that people threw his way. They said it was unlikely for someone like him to achieve what he had. But Elijah was on his way, one book at a time, one sleepless night after another. The streets might have broken him, but the halls of Harvard gave him a new life, a life he had earned. But even as he sat in his white coat, holding a scalpel in hand, the echoes of those early days never really left him. Even now, as Dr. Elijah Brooks, trauma surgeon at one of the country's top hospitals, the scars he carried weren't just physical. His success was a story of defiance, but it didn't come without its burdens. The whispers in the hallways of the hospital when he walked past, the sidelong glances from older, more established doctors were invisible wounds that cut deeper than any surgical incision he had ever made. He was the exception, the one black face in a sea of white coats. Every promotion, every recognition, every praise felt like an uphill battle to prove that he belonged, that he was more than just a symbol of diversity. He was Elijah, and that name was earned. But those invisible scars still pulled at him when he least expected it. Every patient he saved, every life he mended, was a reminder of his strength to push through the pain of being the exception. The small, everyday slights were the hardest to ignore. Elijah would be walking down the street, minding his own business, when a woman would clutch her purse a little too tightly or a shopkeeper would follow him with a gaze that lingered longer than necessary. It wasn't enough to confront a no that would make him the angry black man in their eyes. Instead, Elijah learned to smile, nod, and stay safe. Silence was his shield, a way to protect himself from the emotional toll, but it was a shield that wore thin, especially when he was reminded that, to survive, he had to swallow his dignity and his pain in the name of peace. At work, it wasn't any better. His colleagues sometimes spoke to him in that extra sweet tone, as if they were offering a treat to a child who was far too eager to please. But Elijah had learned how to read the room, how to know when to speak and when to let the moment slide by, because every battle, every confrontation came with a cost, and he had too much at stake to risk losing it all over something as trivial as a comment. Elijah's patience was tested that day when his flight was cancelled. He had just finished a grueling surgery, one that had left him exhausted, both physically and mentally. He was scheduled to perform another surgery in just hours. A child's life was in his hands, and every moment that ticked by made him feel more desperate. The flight home was supposed to be his moment of rest, but now he was stuck in a terminal, watching as his hopes slipped through his fingers, frantic. Elijah grabbed his phone, scrolling through every possible flight. There was nothing direct, and time was running out. His mind raced as he tried to think of alternatives, any way to get to the operating room in time. This wasn't just about a delayed flight. It was about a life that depended on his skills. Elijah couldn't afford to fail. He wouldn't. The TSA guard had been unusually slow in checking his credentials. The tension in the air was palpable, and Elijah could feel it deep in his bones. He had already been through security multiple times before, but today something felt different. Elijah handed over his medical ID, his flight details, his boarding pass, everything. But the guard's eyes lingered on him a little longer than necessary, as if searching for something. "You're a doctor?" the guard asked, his tone thick with suspicion. Elijah nodded, trying to remain calm. "Interesting," the guard muttered, his eyes narrowing. "I don't usually see your kind in this line of work." Elijah stiffened, the words cutting through him like a blade. He had heard it all before, but today, with a child's life on the line, it felt like a slap in the face. He didn't have the time to argue or confront, so he bit back the words he wanted to say, adjusting his tie and walking through the security gate without looking back. The seed had been planted, though the moment was far from over. Elijah approached the counter, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "I need to be rebooked on the next flight to Boston," he said, pulling out his boarding pass and the hospital documents he'd been clutching tightly for the last few hours. A child's life depended on him being there. His eyes briefly flickered to the clock time was running out. Marcia, the agent, barely glanced up from her computer screen. Her lips tightened into a thin, unreadable line. But there was something about the way she looked at him, the coolness in her demeanor, that set him on edge. One moment, she muttered, her tone flat, her body language stiff, as if he were a mere inconvenience. He knew this game. Elijah had played it all his life, being treated as though he didn't belong. As Marcia began typing on the keyboard, Elijah shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He'd been at this airport for hours, battling against flight cancellations, delays, and now this. The air between them grew thick with unspoken judgment. She finally spoke again, her voice cold and slightly sarcastic. "You're really in such a rush, huh?" Her eyes scanned his ID, the glance more critical than curious. "Are you sure this is all in order? You just don't look like the typical ... doctor." Elijah stiffened, his pulse quickening. It wasn't. The first time someone had questioned his credentials, his success, simply because of his appearance. He kept his face neutral, resisting the urge to snap back. "Yes, I'm sure. I have an urgent case to attend to," he said, his voice steady, though inside, anger was bubbling up. Marcia tilted her head, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the desk. "Well, your arrangements are a little unexpected. I'd be careful about these kinds of ... mix-ups," she said, the insinuation hanging in the air like a thick fog. Her eyes met his again, daring him to protest. The next question landed like a punch. "What hospital do you work at?" she asked, leaning closer as though trying to find any reason to doubt him. "And let me guess, you're really a trauma surgeon? You're not just wearing someone else's badge, are you?" The question stung more than she probably realized. Elijah had always felt the weight of being the exception, the black surgeon. But here, in this airport, in front of this woman, the sharpness of her tone cut deeper than usual. "I'm a trauma surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital in Boston," he replied, his voice tight. His fingers curled around the edge of the counter, but he refused to let himself get riled up. "I'm on call right now. A child's life depends on me getting there." Marcia's eyes narrowed. "St. Mary's, huh? I see," she muttered, as if she had just uncovered a great secret. She didn't offer any more help, instead turning her attention back to her computer. Elijah felt like a specimen on display. His credentials, his work, his identity reduced to something she could scrutinize, not appreciate. As Elijah waited, his frustration mounting, a white passenger stepped up to the counter, smiling brightly at Marcia. Without hesitation, she greeted him warmly, her posture immediately shifting to a friendly, almost deferential tone. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice light and accommodating. Elijah's grip on the counter tightened. He knew exactly where this was headed. Within seconds, the white passenger was being assisted without question. No extra scrutiny, no raised eyebrow, just a quick and easy exchange. He watched as the passenger received a new boarding pass and was swiftly ushered through without a second thought. It felt like a slap in the face, a stark contrast to the treatment he had just endured. His heart was pounding, a mixture of rage and helplessness building inside him. The injustice of it all was suffocating. Elijah's patience, already worn thin, was unraveling. He was seconds away from confronting her, from calling out the glaring bias. But something held him back. He couldn't afford to let the anger consume him. Not when a life hung in the balance. "I've given you my ID, my credentials, my proof. I need to be rebooked now," Elijah said, his voice calm but firm, his words deliberate. Marcia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she raised an eyebrow, as though daring him to make the next move. Then, with a sigh, she crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "Maybe you should just calm down, all right? If you don't like it, I can call security to have you removed." Her words hit him like ice water. The casual threat of being removed, tossed out like an unwanted piece of luggage, settled heavily in his chest. She wasn't just dismissing him, she was showing him just how little power he had, how insignificant his presence seemed to her. His mind raced as the seconds ticked by. The child he was supposed to operate on, would they survive if he didn't make it in time? Every second mattered, but so did his dignity. The choice was excruciating. He could continue to endure the disrespect and play by the rules, hoping that this would eventually get sorted, or he could make a stand and risk it all: his flight, his job, and the very principles he had worked so hard to uphold. Time was slipping away. Elijah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had fought for everything in his life to get here, but now, in the face of this blatant racism, he wasn't sure which battle mattered more. The tension was thick. One decision could change everything, but would he be able to live with it? Elijah's heart raced as Marsha's voice cut through the air, shrill and accusatory. "He's threatening me," she screamed, pointing directly at him. Her eyes were wide, the terror in her voice so exaggerated it almost seemed unreal. Elijah's hands immediately shot up in a calm, non-threatening gesture. "I'm not threatening you," he said, his voice controlled, his posture steady. "I'm just asking for help." But it was too late. Security, already standing just beyond the gate, moved quickly toward him. They surrounded him, their eyes cold and unreadable. Elijah barely had time to react before they had him pinned. A mixture of fear, anger, and confusion surged inside him. "What's going on here?" One of the guards barked, his hand landing on Elijah's arm, tightening with force. Another officer stepped in closer, ready to restrain him. "I've done nothing wrong," Elijah protested, but it was as if his words disappeared into the air, swallowed by the growing tension around him. Marsha was still yelling, her voice cracking under the weight of her false accusations. He was getting aggressive. He threatened me. Every word she spat felt like a slap in his face. Elijah could feel the walls closing in, the humiliation of being falsely accused overwhelming him. He tried to explain, but before he could, a handcuff snapped onto his wrist. The metal, cold and unforgiving. Around him, the crowd buzzed, their phones raised high to capture the spectacle unfolding before them. People whispered, some clearly unsure, others too engrossed in the drama to care about the truth. Elijah could hear fragments of their conversations, some murmuring doubts, others looking on in silent judgment. It was a mix of fear and apathy, the kind that comes when you know something isn't right but feel powerless to stop it. Why are they treating him like that? One woman whispered, her voice shaky. "I bet he's trying to scam them," another voice said, the accusation dripping with cynicism. It came from a man standing near the counter who watched the scene unfold, with crossed arms and a smirk on his face. Just another scammer playing the race card. Elijah's stomach churned. These were the kind of words he'd heard all his life, the kind that always left him feeling powerless. It wasn't enough to be right. It wasn't enough to stand tall in the face of injustice. All it took was one person to label him, and suddenly the whole world saw him as a criminal. No one came forward to stop it. No one stepped in. Just the clicking of phones and the soft murmur of voices, as if Elijah were nothing more than an object to watch. A man handcuffed and helpless, the embodiment of a system that always seemed to find ways to keep him down. Without warning, one of the security officers shoved Elijah against the counter with force, sending his phone skidding across the floor. The glass screen shattered upon impact. His stethoscope, always a reminder of the work he did, dangled uselessly around his neck. The impact was jarring. He gasped, the breath knocked from his lungs. His palms smacked against the cold counter as he tried to regain his balance. The force of the shove left him dizzy, humiliated, and angry. "Stay down," one of the officers growled, his grip tightening around Elijah's arm. But Elijah couldn't move. His body felt trapped under the weight of the moment, his pride crushed beneath the eyes of the crowd. No one moved to intervene. The people around him continued filming, muttering under their breath, their hands glued to their phones. Some of them even seemed to enjoy the chaos, as though they were watching a fight break out on a reality TV show. The pain from the counter's edge radiated up Elijah's body, but the physical hurt was nothing compared to the deeper wound, the public degradation, the feeling of being stripped of his humanity. His mind raced, but his body could barely move. A voice cut through the noise, soft yet piercing, like a knife through a darkened room. "Mummy, why are they hurting him?" A little girl's voice, trembling with innocent confusion, sliced through the tension, pulling every head in the terminal toward her. Elijah turned his head slowly, his eyes catching the child standing with her mother just a few feet away. The mother's face was a mix of discomfort and avoidance. She glanced quickly at her daughter, then back at Elijah, her lips pressed tightly together. She said nothing, her silence speaking volumes. The child's innocent question echoed in Elijah's mind long after the words left her mouth. Why are they hurting him? It was so pure, so untainted by the biases of the world, that it made the whole scene seem even more absurd, even more tragic. Elijah wanted to respond, to reassure the girl that everything would be fine, that this wasn't his fault, but the words caught in his throat. The mother's lack of response felt like a quiet inheritance, sound passing down of fear and bias. A lesson learned too young, too soon. The little girl stood there, watching him, waiting for her mother to say something, but nothing came. The scene continued, brutal and unyielding, but in that moment, Elijah felt like he was being torn apart not just by the officers, but by a world that had taught even the youngest to turn away from injustice. As the cuffs tightened around his wrists, Elijah's thoughts drifted, slipping away from the cold steel and the humiliation surrounding him. For a moment, he was no longer in the terminal. He was back in the operating room, standing over the child who was waiting for him. The child's face was pale, their tiny hand shaking under the sterile lights of the ore. Elijah could almost hear the beeping of the machines, the quiet hum of nurses moving around him. His mind had already started to prepare, to focus on the task ahead. But now, in this moment of pain and helplessness, he felt more distant from that room than ever. He was still here, handcuffed and surrounded by strangers who saw him as less than a doctor. The child's life was slipping further from his grasp with each passing second. He could feel the weight of the sterile gloves he would never wear today, the scalpel he would never hold. The images of the operating room blurred in his mind, replaced by the cold reality of where he stood. He was powerless, humiliated in front of a crowd of onlookers who thought they understood, but couldn't even begin to grasp the depth of the injustice he was facing. Just as the cuffs were about to tighten fully, a commanding voice echoed through the terminal, sharp and forceful. "Let him go." The sound reverberated off the walls, cutting through the tension like a blade. Elijah's head snapped up, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't just a voice. It was a command, one that shifted the entire dynamic of the situation. For a split second, time seemed to stop. The security officers froze. Elijah's eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat. Who was this voice? And what would happen next? The Power had shifted in that instant. But what would it cost Elijah to break free from the grip of the injustice surrounding him? A sharp voice sliced through the terminal. Uncuff him, now. Gasps fluttered across the crowd as a woman in a navy trench coat moved with calculated urgency. Her heels echoed with authority. The officers hesitated, but not because of her tone, because they recognized her. Mayor Olivia Ramsey, her eyes locked on the man surrounded by chaos. Her expression changed recognition, then alarm. Elijah, she muttered, already closing the distance. This wasn't just a face from the news. She had met him at the children's surgical fundraiser, the same man who had quietly donated equipment to rebuild the East Wing, who had stood back while others took credit. Elijah Ford. She called louder now, walking past the stunned guards. What is going on here? He didn't answer. He couldn't. The cuffs still gripped his wrists. Her gaze snapped to the nearest officer. Release him, immediately. The hesitation in the air was short-lived, but tension still swirled, unresolved. One of the guards, clearly unsure, said, "Ma'am, there was an incident. I saw enough." Olivia cut in sharply. "I asked you to uncuff him." Before they could move, Marsha's voice chimed in, high-pitched and unsteady. He ... He was being aggressive. I didn't feel safe. Safe. Olivia turned, slowly. You mean when he was standing there, hands up, saying nothing? Marsha flinched. You don't understand what happened before you got here. I understand exactly what I walked into. A black doctor, wrongfully restrained in a public terminal, while you played victim and hoped no one powerful would notice. Silence spread like wildfire. The guards exchanged glances. I'm not asking twice, Olivia repeated. Remove the cuffs. One of them finally obeyed, stepping forward with visible discomfort. As the metal clicked open, Olivia turned to Elijah. Are you okay? She asked, voice lower now. He nodded slightly, but his eyes said otherwise. Before Olivia could say more, a breathless voice called out, Wait, wait, he's telling the truth. A nurse from St. James Hospital pushed through the crowd, waving. A folder, her badge swung from her scrubs. I work with Dr. Ford, she said quickly. He was on his way to perform emergency surgery on a child. A transfer patient. We've been trying to reach him. She opened the folder and pulled out printed schedules, staff ID copies, and a surgical team roster. Here, she said, handing it to Olivia. Everything matches. Check the timestamp. He's supposed to be in the OR. She looked at her watch. 25 minutes. Elijah still hadn't said a word. He didn't want to make a scene, the nurse added, her voice thick with frustration. He just wanted to get to the hospital. But instead, ... She glanced at the people still holding phones in the air. Olivia skimmed the documents. Her jaw clenched. You brought printed proof. The nurse nodded. No one would listen over the phone. I ran. The weight of the truth began to press down, heavy and undeniable. A man from the crowd cleared his throat. I got it all on video, he said. The way she came at him. You might want to see it. Play it, Olivia ordered without hesitation. He tapped his phone, then held it up for her. The footage showed Marsha raising her voice, pointing, stepping forward while Elijah stood still, palms out. Then came the part where she shrieked, He's threatening me. The same second, Elijah quietly backed away. A ripple of murmurs spread around them. Someone whispered, That doesn't look like a threat. Another person added, She lied. She flat out lied. Marsha's eyes darted across the crowd, watching their opinions shift in real time. Her face paled. This is exactly why people record, Olivia said sharply. Because too often, the story gets twisted and the truth buried. She turned to Elijah again. You've been through hell, she said softly. But the reckoning had just begun. Olivia turned back to the crowd, her voice rising not in anger, but in fury soaked with purpose. This man, she said, gesturing to Elijah, has performed over 200 pediatric surgeries this year alone. He volunteers in underserved neighborhoods. He trains interns. He funds scholarships. Gasps, whispers. A few people lowered their phones, and today, while a child waited for him in a hospital bed, you all watched him get humiliated, because someone decided his skin color made him dangerous. Marcia opened her mouth, but Olivia didn't pause. You should be ashamed. Every single one of you who stood by said nothing or whispered doubt while a good man got dragged like a criminal. Elijah shifted, his voice finally cracking through. I just wanted to help a little girl. And you still will, Olivia said firmly. But not before this moment is remembered. The air was different now, thicker, with consequence. Marcia's voice shook as she spoke. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought, maybe he was scamming. Stop. Olivia's tone froze the terminal. This wasn't confusing, or a mistake. This was racial profiling. Marcia started, speechless. And the only scam here, Olivia added coldly, was the lie you told to feel powerful in a place where you were never in danger. She stepped forward, not just for Elijah, but for every person like him who'd been silenced by assumptions. This ends today, at least here, in this terminal. But across the airport, eyes were still watching. Effective immediately, Miss Marcia Benton is suspended without pay pending further investigation. The press room went still as the airport director's voice echoed through the microphones. He adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable, but continued. Security personnel involved have been reassigned, and we are initiating a full review of our bias training protocols. Behind the podium, Mayor Olivia Ramsey stood with arms crossed, unwavering, her voice cut in firm, precise. This isn't just about one employee's failure. It's about a system that allowed it, and that system changes now. Reporters fired questions. Flashes popped. But one thing was clear: Elijah's story had pulled back a curtain, and the public wasn't looking away. Still, the damage had been done. And for Elijah, the next moment mattered far more than any press release. Dr. Elijah Brooks, Olivia said, catching his eye with rare warmth. Your flight's ready, personally arranged. He blinked, still catching up to the whirlwind. Seriously, I don't joke when a child's life is on the line, she replied. As he stepped onto the tarmac, a private jet waiting, his phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Condition worsening. Clocks ticking. He clenched his jaw. Tell them I'm almost there. Hours later, scrubbed in and steady-handed, Elijah entered the OR. The team looked to him, not as a man delayed, but as the surgeon who could save a life, and he did. The child's heartbeat stabilized. Hope, once nearly lost in a terminal standoff, beat strong again by sunrise. The video had gone viral. A bystander's clip of Elijah being detained had racked up over 2 million views, and counting. Black doctor racially profiled while on way to save a child, read one headline. Airport racism, exposed nation, reacts, said another. Talk shows picked it up. Hashtags trended. Hashtag justice for Elijah. Hashtag flying while black. Hash change the system in schools. At workplaces, on news desks, conversations shifted. What once happened in silence was now on screens worldwide. Airports across the country issued statements. Some announced immediate implementation of racial sensitivity and anti-bias training. But for Elijah, the fame felt hollow. It shouldn't take a public outcry for someone like him to be treated with basic human dignity. And yet, maybe this wave was bigger than just him. Cameras lined the back wall. Every seat was filled. Elijah stepped up to the microphone, the weight of the last 48 hours pressing on his shoulders. I wear a white coat. I save lives. I hold degrees from places people dream of. He paused, and none of it stopped someone from assuming the worst because of the color of my skin. A murmur swept the crowd. This isn't just my story, it's our story. Every black man who's been followed in a store, every black woman is overlooked in a boardroom, every child told they're too loud, too angry, too much. He looked up, voice steady. We can't fix what we won't face, but we face it now, together. Weeks later, Elijah returned home for a community health event. Parents waved. Old neighbors hugged him. But it was the small hand tugging his coat that stopped him. A boy, maybe 10, eyes wide. You're Dr. Brooks, right? Elijah knelt. That's me. The boy nodded shyly. My mum showed me the video. You stood up when they tried to stop you. You still saved that kid. I want to be like you. Elijah smiled, a lump in his throat. Then you already are. For the first time in days, the pain of the ordeal softened. He hadn't just survived injustice, he'd lit a path. And somewhere, in that little boy's heart, a future began to bloom. Would you have stayed quiet, pretending not to see it? Elijah's words still echo. When he was dragged out like a criminal, would you have looked away? Or would you have stood up and said, "This is wrong"? Too often, silence protects injustice. So ask yourself, if you had been there, would you have spoken? It doesn't just happen to Elijah. Maybe it happened to your brother, your friend. Maybe it happened to you. Share it. Let this comment section be more than reactions make it a place where stories live, where experiences connect. Have you faced racial profiling, humiliation, discrimination? Let others know they're not alone. Every voice adds weight. Every click expands the reach. Like this video if you believe in justice. Share it if you've had enough of staying silent. Subscribe if you want more stories that speak truth. Let's turn awareness into action. Let's amplify voices that have been ignored for too long. The fight doesn't end here. These aren't just hashtags there. Fuel for a movement. Type them, post them, live them. Let the world know we're not done yet. Hashtag justice matters. Hashtag stand with Elijah.